So the main question is, if we get CL football and Strasbourg gets CL football, what happens next? My friends, I give you guys the answers and I give you the latest updates and transfer target news that you can't afford to miss out on. So I hope you guys enjoy. Hit that like button, show some love, and let's get straight into things. Let's start things off by discussing these Morgan Rogers updates. Now, as we all understand, Aston Villa are in a bit of a pickle at the moment. Their wage bill is at 90% of their club revenue, and they're finding it pretty unsustainable to maintain that wage bill if they are unable to consistently get Champions League football. And, you know, I have to make this point straight off the bat, but it really does feel like securing Champions League football is pretty much like drinking from a poisoned chalice, in the sense that, you know, you spend everything to have the chance to sip from it, but it then guts you from the insides if you're unable to keep sipping from it. And I mean that in the sense that clubs kind of find themselves in like financial traps where the only way to compete in the CL is to maybe overextend yourselves by offering more competitive salaries and overpaying to bring in a high quality of players. So at the moment, you are unable to sustain getting regular CL football. The whole model collapses and you have nothing to show from it in the end. So this season is looking pretty dire for Aston Villa in those aspects. And it does seem like they could be forced to sell some key players to have the possibility to reinvest those earnings back into their team. At the moment, there's doubts around Kamara, and I'd imagine he'd get a ton of interest from big clubs in the league. And Morgan Rogers is another player. Now, we have some updates coming out around a lot of interesting insights on this story. We're learning that ideally, Villa would prefer around 90 to 100 mil to even consider entertaining offers for Morgan Rogers. And I think that sounds ridiculous. That's insane. But it's like typical overestimations with evaluations in this game, right? Like, these clubs do it all the time, but it is what it is. And we're also learning that one of the main guys at Chelsea, which is pretty obvious, who is really pushing for this move or really vouching for this player, is none other than Joe Shields. And I think he has an obsession to reunite with all his favourite academy stars at Man City. I don't blame him. I feel like when you work with a golden generation and you know how good they are, if you're able to get them all in the same squad and team, there's a lot of benefits you can tap into from there. And I think with Morgan Rogers, this is a player that I think if we did like make even more serious attempts to go for him, I think he's a good player and he makes sense. I like how he plays. I like the fact that his dribbling style is very much about what he does in essential areas. I've always felt like the players who can keep up their high dribbling stats by running insides, moving in the field, they tend to be the best ones. And Rogers' two-footed ability, body balance, strength, power, explosiveness. I think he's a very interesting player. Knowing the fact that this guy can perform left wing, up front, on the right, as an attacking mids, and could really give this squad a lot of benefits we can turn to, and could be that 2-in-1 player that would make more sense compared to maybe signing a striker. And I make this point because if you consider really going for Morgan Rogers, I don't know if you can also afford to go for a striker. If anything, you're saying you're going to be the number 2 striker, you're going to be the left winger, you're going to be the guy we turn to fill holes in this team. So let's watch his space. I think we have to watch his space because Aston Villa probably know that no club will entertain paying that type of money. We'll learn later on just how dire their PSR situation is, because they must comply to have a chance to stay there. Could they find creative ways and hacks to get out from this? Could other players possibly go freeing up potential? Let's see what happens there. But, you know, we are learning, obviously, that Morgan Rogers would be open to a move, but he's not going to force anything. He's not that open or that desperate to leave Aston Villa. He has a good thing going for him. So if any club is really, really, really serious for him, they have to show it with their money and they have to produce an offer that does satisfy Aston Villa. I guess the only possible ways to strike a deal is if Disasi and Felix both remain there, but it's looking unlikely, of course. It seems like Aston Villa won't be signing Disasi because Disasi has been playing most games at right back, and he's not even in the team recently. The guy is a top-class box defender, and if you're not using him that way, there is no need for him, sadly. And Joao Felix was attracting interest from Flamengo, but they've now balked at the salary demands, and Felix isn't too keen on leaving Europe at his age right now. So unless these type of factors align for us, the only way we are striking a deal for Morgan Rogers is if it does include players going in the opposite direction. That is the only thing that makes this deal make sense. So my friends, share your thoughts and opinions. Is Rogers someone that we should be ambitious for, make a move for? Do you feel like he's the guy? Or do you think there's other options we should be turning our attentions to? Listen, if I'm going for someone for big money in the Prem, I'm going for my countryman, in Mohamed Kudus, who's a lot less than a Morgan Rogers. So that's that first story out the way. I'll be focusing on a lot of reports involving ourselves and our affiliate club in Strasbourg. But to start with providing the context first, at the moment, there is a strong possibility that both ourselves and Strasbourg might just bag Champions League football, but by doing so, man, it creates some headaches and some pickles. Now, at the moment, Strasbourg are sick, but they're on 57 points, level with both Lille and Nice, and they're only 2 points behind second place Marseille. They have Angers left, who are 14th place, and they have Le Havre, who are fighting to survive in Ligue 1. So there's an incredible opportunity for Strasbourg to make history this season. I hope they do, but even if they do that, it does feel like maybe getting Champions League football could be one of the worst things to hit Strasbourg for next season. So let's unpack and dissect that, right? Now, there are a few things we can do. On one hand, if we do absolutely nothing to meet UEFA's compliance rules in terms of, parent clubs and sister clubs competing in the same European competitions, essentially this could be that possible reality. It would mean that if both clubs, let's say, secured Champions League football, one club would have to be demoted into the Europa League. And that is determined by the league position from either team. So if Strasbourg ended up being second place and we ended up being fifth place, for example, we would be demoted to the Europa League if we do nothing to comply with UEFA. This would work the same if we both secured Europa League football. The laws are quite interesting. For example, let's say if both clubs have the same league position, of course, then things like the coefficient from the league that each club is playing in would then be a factor that determines who gets the best European competition and who plays in the weakest one. I mean, I could really go into details, but that is not the main point here, because there are ways for both clubs to participate in the Champions League together if that does happen. But here's how this actually works out. Essentially, the alliance between both clubs would have to be temporarily halted to accommodate both teams participating in the Champions League. Of course, there are strict rules around multi-club ownership to play in the European competitions. But the good news is we've been in talks with UEFA since January to find the best possible way to comply with the structure. And essentially, the most likely outcome is that Strasbourg would be moved into a blind trust situation, which would remove any suggestions of a conflict of interest between both clubs playing in the Champions League. Now, we can do this in two ways. This can be done by us reducing our stake temporarily, because we own around 99.7% of Strasbourg. I mean, that is basically owning the football club. But as I'm mentioning, blind trust is the way to go. And that would be a temporary change of ownership to remove all those conflicts of interest. There's been many examples of this, of course, this season. Nottingham Forest find themselves in a similar situation, as their owner is also the owner of Olympiacos. But we've seen the blind trust situation working, I think, last season with Man City and Girona. And essentially, it works like this. It meant that Man City transferred their shares of Girona to an independent trustee, with the aid of the CFCB, First Chamber, who were like the independent party, working to make sure that nothing was being done illegally. Essentially, once the season's over, the shares would then be transferred back to the parent club. So it's only a temporary situation. And to get the approval, it must prove that no one was simultaneously involved directly or indirectly in any management capacity between both clubs. We had to make sure that no one had control or influence of more than one club. That must be proven. And they had to provide evidence of a change in structure, making sure there was no like financial support, aids, that type of stuff, and that no one had like executive power when it came to making those big decisions between more than one club. So that's all good, yeah, but the only techie thing behind that is that it would mean that next season we would not be allowed to loan players to Strasbourg. So I don't know what this means for Amugu, who we signed knowing that he'd be going to Strasbourg next season. If they get CL, that can't be the case. We'll have to find a new plan for this kid. I also think, what does this now mean for Strasbourg? I think financially they'll be okay to survive for one season, but a lot of the great things they did came from players that we had bought for them and players that we had loaned out to them. So they'll probably miss out on a lot of their key guys that even put them on into a CL position next season, kind of undermining things. So I think maybe it would be great for Strasbourg to get Europa League football, because we could then loan out players to them because we're in two completely different competitions. So it's set to be an exciting end to this season. That's the second story out of the way, my friends. Moving on to the third story. And we discussed these Emmanuel Emegha links, because reports coming out from France, from Foot Masato and many others suggest that we have been holding talks with Emegha regarding a potential summer transfer move. Now, this season, he's bagged 14 goals for Strasbourg, helping them, really secure their position this season. He's attracting a lot of interest, with Newcastle showing strong interest in the player. And Emegha has admitted that playing in the Premier League is a lifelong dream, and he would be open to that. Now, going back to the reports, we've learned that we've had open conversations and discussions regarding long-term contracts. So that is pretty big news. Emegha is on the short list of players we are looking at. You'd imagine Strasbourg would earn quite a bit of money from this deal, and they could use that to reinvest into signing other players for next season, right? So that would be really interesting to see. But I feel like I have to remind you guys, I've said this already, I'll say it again, but during this stage of the season, a stage where the end results haven't been determined. We don't know if we've 100% bagged CL football just yet. We have to wait and see. It means that you have to use this time wisely, and you're going to use this time by holding conversations with a variety of players on your shortlist. That shortlist is determined by whether you're in the Champions League or whether you're in the Europa League. That's how it works, and depending on the competition we're in, that determines the type of player we're going for. So you'll hear talks a lot for more players, yeah? Remember that in the back of your heads. Going back to Emegha, do I like these links? Listen, I got to be honest, personally, no. Is that because he's a bad player? Absolutely not. He's got some really strong attributes. Statistically, it's a fact. He is the fastest player in Ligue 1. No one is faster than him. That is a big thing. He's a very tall striker, I think 6'4", 6'5". He's an unrelenting runner off the ball, whether that's in the defensive phase, but most importantly, in his willingness, of course, to time his runs correctly and exploit the offside traps against opposition teams. And I don't want to say reminds me of a Cavani, because that's strong, but there is that Cavani spirit in the sense that he really does prioritize and focus on movement and making the runs that maybe other strikers wouldn't tend to make. I guess the only thing that not really puts me off, but what I don't want is maybe he reminds me a bit of a first-gen Nicholas Jackson. And I just kind of feel like for where we have to go right now, I want to kind of accelerate things a little bit. Yes, on paper, having someone who's pretty similar in certain aspects of Nico Jackson. It's going to help the team. If we had another Nico this season, I'm sure we would have bagged CL football already. Let's keep it real. But I want someone who can offer a complementary factor to how we play, but also offer us something different that we don't have. Maybe like a physical presence, an aerial presence. Not saying that Emegha's weak. Yeah, he gets on the end of moves, but he's not going to be that aerial platform for the team. I say his finishing has been the strong point this season. And from a small shooting sample, he has shown statistically that he has very high accuracy, which shows good composure when he's one-on-one. But equally, even though like his non-penalty expected goals ranking are very high, when you watch Strasbourg play, a lot of those chances naturally come from the fact that he's getting on the end of moves. He's 1v1 with the keeper. There's space he's running into. And I just don't see that being translated as frequently if he was to come to Chelsea, where we don't have that luxury week in, week out. That is the main thing. So that has to be an important factor behind who we sign up front. I want box excellence. I think we kind of need that. So let's watch the space. We're only holding talks. We're understanding who we can get, who wants us, the cost of players, the cost of deals. And as I'm really reiterating, get used to this before the window officially opens. And to end with the final Blue link, but today reports came out from Sky Sports and other outlets that we are looking at La Masia star and Juan Hernandez Torres, a guy who played a key part in Barcelona's UEFA Youth League win this season. And at the moment, he does have a 5 million release clause, which becomes active when he turns 18 in July. At the moment, us and Man United are showing a lot of interest. United have offered a career plan which involves, contributing to the under-21s first. And us, on the other hand, are offering a Strasbourg link where you can go there for the next few seasons, play there, and have a pathway into our first team. Barca, under Deco, they want to make sure they're keeping their best talents and stars. They don't want another situation where Mark Yu left Barca for us. But let's keep it real. He also left because we offered way more money than what he was set to receive at Barcelona. And I think that's the advantage that Premier League clubs are naturally going to have when it comes to poaching some of the best talents from their international rivals' academies. Yeah, he looks like a good player. From the research I've done, he's in that mold of like a Santi Cazorla, an Isco. He can play false nine across different attacking positions, great spatial awareness, comfortability, playing with the outside of his foot, inside, great press resistance, that sense of like flow and balance, and how comfortable he is in tight areas. He's a typical Spanish starlet, right? So let's watch the space. I don't know how this works if Strasbourg were to get CL football. Is there like a window of opportunity where Blue can still make signings before any of next season's laws become active? Who knows? Could that be a possibility where we see that happen? Obviously, we know that we've signed Sarr from them already. If they get CL football, we wouldn't be allowed to even loan him back to Strasbourg, would we? Even though the plan at the moment is to allow Sarr to remain with Strasbourg if they get CL. So listen, the club have smart people there. They know the laws better than I do. I'm sure that there's opportunities that can work, that can make sense. Is it simply just Strasbourg making independent offers for our players again? Time will tell, my friends. But anyway, that is all the latest reports today. Get involved in the conversation. A lot of interesting stories and conversations to have today. And I will catch you guys tomorrow with the big preview this weekend for our game against Newcastle. See you guys then. Cool.